And I was really thrilled when my friend who shot that video told me, don't clean up before people get there. Let us have the mess. And I said, perfect. So I think that that is a lot of what we are doing when we come together in spiritual community, is letting each other see the truth of our human experience, the mess. And I always like to remind people of this saying that is really close to my heart, which is that we're always comparing our messy insides to other people's outsides. And I think we have to remember that, especially during this time where we're engaging with people over social media, over the internet. We're feeling all of the grief, the pain, the fire, the love inside ourselves. And sometimes we're only seeing other people's lives in 2D. We're all carrying and holding so much right now. One thing, when I watched that video, I remember the kids taking all of that paint and covering my big glass windows that look out to my backyard. And I did not wash that paint off for 6 months. It was like this beautiful, messy reminder that there used to be that much life in my life. But I will say that when I did finally wash it off, it was this incredible view again of the world. My mother and I just exhaled, like, look at all of that out there too. And so I've been thinking a lot about that. After a big fire, the clearing that is left from that devastation is fertile ground. And so as we come into 2021, we are invited to think about, what did the fires, the pandemic, the grief, the shifts and changes of 2020, what has been cleared? What are our opportunities for new growth this year? Even as we will keep struggling, this pandemic is not over. I'm very excited for the hope of the vaccines. We've been hit very hard here in Texas, and some of my family members now have the vaccine, so I'm grateful for that. But so that's what I want us to think about together today, is how can we find new growth, joy, dancing, music? How can we keep those close at hand, even as we are not deluding ourselves that there's not any struggle left? There certainly is. So I want to start by reading to you this beautiful short piece by the Indian author and activist Arundhati Roy. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine our world and ready to fight for it. One thing I know, and one thing that I want to lift up, is that all of you, all through the past 9 months, have been fighting for this community and imagining new ways of being. This is not how you were doing church this time last year. And while I know Zoom is not for everyone, I want to lift up and commend all of you who've been doing the work of just staying together. That is such sacred work. And I want to ask you to think about who you could be inviting in this year. I was so thrilled to see that you have a visitor today, or a new person, and hats off to your member who invited her in. One of the silver linings of this time is that you could have people in your congregation from anywhere, and people need it. It's getting harder and harder to be isolated. We're 9 months in, and some people are lonelier than ever. So I want to ask you to think about, is there a neighbor? Is there a family member, a friend, wherever they live? And could you just be inviting them in? That alone could be a great gift for this year. I truly believe that Unitarian Universalism has a message that saves lives. You can't quite see it, but my whole stole is a rainbow here, made by a member of the Wildflower Church congregation. There are people for whom the message that we are worthy and whole just because, there are people who have not received that message yet. No one has said to them yet, you are loved just the way you are. You are welcome just as you are. And it is something I think that sometimes people like me who were raised in this faith may take for granted, or those of us who've been with it a long time. We can't. And we shy away from evangelism, I think, sometimes, but people need to know that you are here. So the first thing I ask you to bring to the world that is still on fire is that invitation to anyone and everyone who might need it. You yourself are a gift to the community, worthy and whole just because, and you could make that felt for others too. If you're doing that already, then again, thank you. I want to tell you a story about the time that my congregation in Chicago, when I lived in Chicago, was there for me, and why I feel that church is worth working for and imagining in this time. So this was about 10, 11 years ago. I was the literacy director for an organization in Chicago called Open Books. This was before I was a minister, before I had moved back home to Austin, where I live now. I lived downtown in Chicago, and I experienced the winters somewhat like you must be experiencing. I remember them well. And I was riding my bike, I was a bike commuter, downtown it was the day before the grand opening of this literacy center, this thing we had been working toward for so long. It was going to open up the next day, and I was going to MC the council, city council people were coming. We were going to throw this big party, and we were celebrating. We had a bookstore that was stocked by donated books and staffed by volunteers, and then we taught literacy in a city that needed it so much. So I was riding my bike, very excited for this grand opening, and that kind of reminds me of how I felt a year ago. So many things were coming into place for me. I was so happy in my life. So much of my ministry and my mission of bringing people together around music and dance, church, at the Y, it had really come together. And I felt that exuberance you see in that video. That is how I felt about my life right before this pandemic hit. And so the same 10 years ago on my way to work. And then I wiped out on railroad tracks. And I found myself sitting there in pain, kind of just stunned. And again, that is how I felt when we started this pandemic. Not knowing, thinking to myself, I don't know, do I call a cab home? Do I call a cab to work? Eventually I realized I needed to call a cab to the hospital. And I ultimately had a broken leg. I had to have surgery. All of this was happening in the Chicago winter while I had a 6-month-old baby and no family in town. No car. My husband and I lived on a walk-up apartment. And the people who got us through that time were the people of Second Unitarian Church of Chicago in Boys Town. I will never forget it. I couldn't be alone with my baby because on crutches, how could I carry her if my apartment caught fire, if something bad happened? But even for usual stuff, like from the crib to the changing table, I needed someone. We are not meant to live this life alone. We are meant to live in community. And so folks from my small group at Second Unitarian brought us meals. They sat with me when my husband had to go to work and I was home with the baby. They drove me to surgeries and physical therapy. They helped kind of lug me up the stairs when I was still numb after that surgery. It's something that I'll never be able to repay. And I can only hope to foster in my life for others moving forward. And while that was happening, I was also reading a book, and I want to show you. I keep it with me 10 years later. It's called Animal Vegetable Miracle by Barbara Kingsolver. And I recommend it to you. She and her family had chosen to take 1 year to grow all their own food and live and kind of homestead on their own. And I remember feeling a bit jealous because I couldn't even get up to get my own food. And these people were farming their own food. But something magical happens on page 79. So picture me in my apartment in cold Chicago with my broken leg up, reading this book about people just living their best and most productive life while I can't. And then on page 79, we get this. Tuesday, only slightly nicer weather. Stephen headed out again. I was mending a broken leg that spring and could not yet navigate the steep, slick mountainside, so I was consigned to the wifely role of waiting for Man the Hunter to return. Now I tell you, I read this and I couldn't believe it. She had waited 79 pages to tell us that she had a broken leg, this thing that was consuming my whole existence. She doesn't bring it up again, but one other time, where she mentions at the very end that she hopes her kids, ages 8 and 17, were learning from this time. And they were taking responsibility at the time for the entire Thanksgiving meal because she couldn't do it with a broken leg. Friends, I have clung to this and clung to the experience of my church. And what I want to tell you about that is, when you feel despairing in this time, if you feel despairing, remember that little things can change and save people's lives. Little things like a meal left on a neighbor's doorstep, a phone call to ask, how are you? How can I support you? Just loving somebody and inviting them to church. You don't know how much that will mean to them and how much they need it. So that's one. And two, something that might be the worst thing that's ever happened to you or something that's consuming your whole life right now might someday be just a sentence or two in the book of your life, in the book of your year. And we have agency over how we tell our stories. Now, that does not mean that I think this pandemic, that I think systemic racism that we're grappling with, that environmental devastation, that it deserves only one sentence or two in the book of our lives. But what I do believe is that we have power. We can do even small things to make things better this year, any year. And we have a leg up as UUs because we are in it together. There are communities, whatever you care about, if it's racial justice, if it's the environment, whatever it is, there's a UU organization for you to tap into this year if you feel isolated. There's organizations for UUs with disabilities, UUs who are trans, UU youth, UU elders, women. The Women's Federation has been so wonderful and does great work acknowledging the elder women who often really are unsung heroes in our communities. So I want to invite you to think about how you're going to tell the story of last year and what you're going to do to make the story of 2021 one of your own agency and one of connection and community. And I want to thank you for what you're doing already. And then the last thing I want to leave you with in this time is a little story from scripture that also means a lot to me. This is the Poverty and Justice Bible. Growing up in First UU Austin, I did not get much Bible literacy. And so I've been playing a little catch up in seminary and beyond, because I think literacy across faiths is important. And certainly when I was a YMCA interfaith chaplain, it was important. This edition of the Bible I heard about from Reverend Dr. William Barber, the great justice leader out of North Carolina. And what I love about it, y'all, I love to highlight a book. Love to, but this comes pre-highlighted. Highlight? I don't know. But any passage that relates to poverty and justice is already highlighted for you. So if this is a topic, and I believe that it would be, that would interest you. However, this part is more about the arts. Exodus, feminist scholar Carol Myers argues, may be the most important book of the Bible. And it tells the story of the Israelites' long, hard journey from slavery to the promised land. And in it, they are in a long time of wilderness, of desert. And in our communities, some of us ourselves in a modern way, or our ancestors, have a very real understanding of slavery. Some of us may feel more the metaphor of being in the desert during this time of pandemic, of being in the wilderness, not sure what is yet to be born out of that clearing. So I invite you to relate to this story in whatever way you can. Chapter 16, verse 19 through 22, the Song of Miriam. After the Israelites had walked safely through on dry ground, Miriam, the sister of Erin, was a prophet. So she took her tambourine and led the other women out to play their tambourines and to dance. Then she sang to them. And like the Barbara Kingsolver passage about her broken leg, this piece just gave me so much life. Here they are in the desert in the hardest time of their life, in one of the most important stories, in one of the most important books in human experience. And what does the female prophet do but sing and dance with the other women? Can you imagine? As Arundhati Roy said, we can travel through the portal of this pandemic lightly. We can't bring much if we want joy on the other side. And likewise, the Israelites would not have carried much on this journey, but Miriam and the women brought tambourines. And the best part to me is this two-letter word, so. Miriam, the sister of Erin, was a prophet, so she took her tambourine. Not Miriam was a prophet and they tolerated her tambourine. Not Miriam was a prophet, oh, and by the way, she had a tambourine. So she took her tambourine. And so what I want to say to you today is to keep music, joy, dance, life alive in your time together in whatever way nurtures you. And to ask yourself, as Unitarian Universalists, and I believe each of us has the chance to be a prophet for our communities, for our loved ones, with our message of love and acceptance. So what is your tambourine? What is your instrument of grace, of joy, of getting through it? Maybe for you, it's walking the dog. Maybe it's nature. I heard that water is important where you are, Dwayne was telling me. So maybe it's something being out in water. Whatever your instrument is, share it. Share it. Find a safe way. I know we're masking. I know a lot of us are staying home, certainly here in Texas. But please find a way to share your joy. The world is on fire and there's still love. We need each other now more than ever. So I invite you to take that question with you into 2021. What is your tambourine and how are you going to share it? Thank you for the chance to be with you and share my tambourine with you today.
Thank you, Erin.